We're starting early. Ooh. All right. Hi again, everyone. I'm done after this. It's going to be great. I might get a martini or two. Hi. For those who just joined, my name is Alex Day. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Futures track here at Tales of the Cocktail, along with Claire Warner over there. Our committee has put together a collection of 8 talks over the last 2 days on the future of hospitality, the future of this industry, future of our trade, to really look at it both internally and externally to see what the factors are going to shift us in the next 10 years. And this is really the first time we're doing this. So we are experimenting a little bit with the type of talks that we're having, the format of them. So any feedback that you have for us, please share it via the WOVA app or come track us down. If it's later tonight and I've had a lot of martinis, then make me write it down on my phone. This is our last session of the slate. I'm really, really excited for this one as it speaks to so much of what all of us do, which is hospitality. And we are very fortunate enough to have Sean Flynn here to talk with us about the art of being hospitable. Please welcome Sean.
Well, hello, everybody. How y'all doing? So I'm Sean Flynn. I'm the Senior Editorial Director at Food & Wine. And for the last 20 years, I've been covering the service industry, but I've also worked in the service industry. I've been a bartender, I've been a barista, I've been a server. And don't tell anybody this, but my first editorial job was to cover bar reviews for the Buffalo News. I was 18 years old. Nobody fact-checked that, so don't tell anyone. But I got into it and I followed it for the last 20 years because it means so much to me. And I think that it means so much to everybody in this room. And hospitality itself is such a cornerstone of, it's obviously what the business is based on. So for me, as we are looking at the future of what the service industry is going to look like, to me, it's always really important to look at the cornerstones of what makes it so important. And you have the advancement of AI, you have technology, you have social media, and that's all great, and that will continue to change, and it'll continue to evolve. But at the end of the day, hospitality, making people feel welcome, making people feel important, creating those individual moments, really, really stand out. So for me, as we get into this, why being hospitable matters now? Well, right now, I think we can say there's a lot going on in the world. But it's also really important to make people feel comfortable, welcome, that they have a place to go to. There's a reason that Cheers was such a successful show. It's because so many people identified with that. And right now, like I said, when you have the advancement of so many new technologies, it's great to invest in that and to focus on it. But also, how do you kind of couple that with the need to make people feel welcome and have those important moments with everybody? I should have written bigger notes. So setting the stage. I'll be honest with you, when I was coming up with a concept for this, I knew that I wanted to talk about the importance of hospitality because hospitality, like I said, is so important. But to kind of figure out how do you approach it in a 20-minute conversation is actually really hard. It's hard because one, I could either go through this in 5 seconds and just say be welcoming, or I can go into all the nuances of how you do that. So I'm going to try to kind of marry the two. And I've called out a couple of kind of areas where I think that people, especially in the industry, have done a really great job. Some are more tangible than others, so we'll kind of go through those. But like I said, how do you, as AI is advancing and as technology is advancing and social media is changing, that will always continue to change. So how do you make for those individual moments that people will remember? And at the end of the day, yes, it's about being, a good, welcoming person, but it's also about really standing out and creating kind of a marketing plan for yourself. Because right now there are, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of bars across the United States. So when someone goes to a bar, they can go to 10 other bars and they don't necessarily have to come back to yours. But how do you make yours stand out from the rest? And yes, it's through offerings, that's really important, but it's also through that connection. And I really like that that factoid that was shared earlier, that 83% of luxury consumers will ask their bartenders for recommendations. People want that one-to-one human connection, and that never changes. So as we look at 2035, what does that actually look like? How is that going to change? How is that going to evolve? How do you loop in technologies and whatnot to help support you kind of in the areas that can be like just general workflows and whatnot, so you can focus on that human connection. So I broke it up into 3 areas. Obviously, I used the robot as just kind of an example. Not everyone's going to have a robot in their bar, but it also kind of points to the fact that things are changing, things are evolving, and hopefully there's some takeaways that you can get for your own bar. So what I broke it down to is 3 sections where I think it's really helpful. One being offerings, what you have on your menu, what you're serving, how can you make that more approachable for people? 2 is interactions, just like I've been talking about. How do you have those good connections without getting caught up in kind of the minutia of what you're doing from like a minute-to-minute process, but also like how do you make room for those individual connections and make for those memorable moments that people will walk away with and be like, oh yeah, I went to this bar and I had a phenomenal experience. Here's why. And then also one that's a little bit more obscure and also very hard to kind of like make adjustments to, but design. And I thought design was like a really interesting concept that I want to dive into a little bit. So we'll kind of talk through some of those. But at the end of the day, like there's so many more areas that are vital to this, but I think that these 3 are kind of the easiest to jump into. So offerings. Hearing about like an inclusive menu, like there's so many areas that you can go in with this, but for me, I think when I really started to pay attention to this, it's when non-alcoholic and low ABV didn't kind of move from being like on the back page, if it was offered at all, to being like a cornerstone of what is offered at the bar. And that bartenders are now giving it the same focus that they gave to all of their other cocktails in terms of ingredients, in terms of preparation, in terms of execution. But it's really, really thoughtful because not everybody is drinking anymore, but people still want that human connection. And then also, this is kind of akin to it, or akin's not the right word, but parallel to it is like responsible sourcing. So how can you be more sustainable? When I think of sustainability, I do think of hospitality because to me, I think it's how are you kind of a good citizen within your own community? How are you supporting other industries? How are you supporting other people? But then also, how are you speaking to the interests of your customer base and making sure that you are sourcing products responsibly? So, looking at a couple of examples of bars that are doing a really great job. You have Zapote in Mexico, which I just realized we have some Joshuas here. But I wanted to give you a call out, which is convenient that you're here. I was able to go to your bar probably about a year ago, and I was really impressed with how you welcomed me and my friends in, but also through the offerings that you had and the design. So we're going to kind of touch upon your bar in a number of settings, so thank you. But what I really liked is like the open approach to it. You have these open bars, and that might seem kind of like, not just for your bar, but generally speaking, having these open bars, like you might not have that control over it. Not everybody's building their bar from the ground up. So we'll kind of get into more approachable ways to tackle that. But when you're looking at that bar space, it really allowed for people to have that like individual connection. So I'm standing next to Joshua as he was making me some drinks, and I can see what he was doing behind the bar, and he was mixing up things, and it allowed me to like see what he was doing and ask more questions. And that educational like touch point was like so cool because it wasn't just me getting a drink and drinking it and like moving on. I felt like I got to actually learn something. And for me, like if I ever go back, I'm gonna make sure to go back to your bar because it was such a standout moment. But we also have Oisin Kelly at the Sidecar Bar in Dublin. They're very focused on sustainability. So their goal over the next year is to be zero waste. And the way that they're doing it is that they're looking through all of the areas that they're kind of disposing, whether it's orange peels or whatever there may be. But if they can dehydrate them, ground them up, use them as garnishes, use them in distillations, like what are ways that they can repurpose some of the excess waste that they have into something that's really creative. And it also makes for a good story, something that you'll remember, something that you'll share with friends. And that's just like a really cool moment to have. It also, like I said, makes for that individual identity that to me, like that's kind of one of those little notes that I'm going to take away from, and I'm going to remember that as I talk to friends. If someone's going to Dublin, I'm going to say, you should check out this bar, they're really cool, blah, blah, blah. This is my favorite one. So interactions. This is both the one that's like super obvious, and very nuanced, is the interactions matter so much. And there's so much to do on a day-to-day basis that's like sometimes those interactions can kind of get lost in the shuffle as you're just focusing on service. But how do you make service like really, really stand out? And there's a couple of areas that I think kind of make for like an obvious connection. So has anyone here been to Shinji's in New York? Okay, so the space is really, really beautiful, but it's also incredibly small. One thing that they've done that I think is really interesting is that they do tableside service. So it's like literally 3 tables, and then they have a big bar focused in the middle. But they'll come to your table with a cart, and they do all the presentations like right in front of you, which one is just like a really great social media moment. So like that's built-in marketing. People share it, and people want to experience that as well. But then also that individual education is happening where people can ask questions about what they're doing, what they're mixing, why they chose that. And it's almost like theater, which I think is just really cool. And it's such a smart way of utilizing the space because on top of that, then you don't have people like walking around the very small bar and kind of congesting it. So you're kind of bringing that service to the people right then and there. So that is something that can be done in pretty much any bar, based obviously on staffing and all that stuff. But it is something kind of easy to implement. Like I said, the mini educational opportunities, those are when you have a moment to kind of share what you're doing and why you're doing it with your guest. That's so, so vital because so many people want to be educated. For me, there's a lot of similarities between journalism and the service industry. What we do is we provide a service as well. We educate people. And that's why, like for me, when I started out in journalism and I'd been working in the service industry, that I felt so aligned to it because to me, it's like, how do you provide those answers to people? How do you provide good service? How do you make people want to come back? For us, it's about reading our content, but for you all, it's about coming and experiencing your drinks. So having those kind of mini moments where you can educate people on what you do and why you do it is really, really important. And like I said, it helps you stand out from the crowd. Like not every bar is going to walk through and kind of explain everything that they're doing. But if you can make for those moments, it really makes like your place stand out so you don't have to kind of compete with the other places. And then also mementos. I'll be honest, I had a misspelling in here, but it also is kind of fitting. I spelled it mementos. I like to focus on the moments. But I did correct it. But for the mementos, the Connaught Bar in London, probably one of my favorite places ever. They do hospitality bar none. Like absolutely amazing. So they also do tableside service. They are a bigger bar, but they bring kind of that element of like making you feel special, going to your table, making the drink in front of you, explaining what they're doing. But then they also, for any drink that you order, they'll give you a little recipe card that you can take home. And that, it's like such an easy way of like making people remember your experience. And to me, it's kind of funny, like being in the journalism side of it, my background is primarily travel. I worked on the travel side of things for about 12 years before I moved into food. And one kind of funny anecdote that I always appreciate or always thought was interesting is at hotels, they actually will bake in the fact that they know that people are going to kind of walk off with like the shampoo and they're going to walk off with the conditioner because that they actually kind of to a degree, I don't want to speak for every hotel, they encourage it because that actually makes people form that connection with your hotel and they'll actually want to go back. So it costs them almost nothing to make that connection and encourage people to come back again and again and form those memories, but then also to kind of share their experience. And it's the same at a bar, is that I went home, obviously Connaught's in London, so I can't go all the time. But when I do, I always make sure to go back, and I've got a bunch of their cards, and then I try to make them at home, and then I share them with friends, and then I'll put it on Instagram. And if I'm doing it, there's so many other people that are doing it as well, and it just makes for those moments where like, it's free marketing, which is great, but then you're also making for like a really nice individual experience. And one important thing to call out is that technology will never be able to do that. I mean, to a degree, you could probably get some AI chatbot to like share out recipes and whatnot. But having that like human connection, that's something that AI will never be able to do. And so when we look at 2035 at the service industry and we look at technology and we look at the things that are changing, those moments don't change. So we'll get to it in a little bit, but the question that I want to ask all of you is like, as you're looking at the future of your bar, how can you implement some of those things? Or how can you think of what is the future of your bar if you're implementing some new technologies or whatnot, but like how do you really perfect those individual connections? So design. This is kind of a weird one, but follow me on this one. So there's a couple of bars that do a really great job with this, but my thought with design is that, like I said, it's not something that everybody can change immediately because not everybody's building a bar from the ground up, but we'll get into that a little bit. But as you think of design, there's one kind of small factoid that I always like to focus on. I'm originally from Buffalo. Frank Lloyd Wright, if anyone doesn't know, has like a beautiful, beautiful house there that he designed. And one of the things that he did is you go through and you get a tour of it. They'll call out the fact that one of the living rooms is intentionally, the ceiling is lowered. So as you walk in, you're actually encouraged to sit down. It makes like people subconsciously think like, oh, I should sit, I should stay a while, I should have a conversation. And that like that's just kind of a really cool moment. And I think in bars you get a lot of the same as well. That there are small things that you can implement that do make kind of a subconscious change. I'll call out Zapote again, but having those open bars, like it really encourages for those moments where you can ask questions, and then you can engage in conversations with the person that's making your drink and why they're making the drink and where they source the products from and how they came up with it, and it's just really great. Kanato in Manhattan also has the same thing. So in the center of their bar space, their bar is just kind of one big block, and the bartender is actually on the outside standing next to the guest. So it's the same thing where like people have the opportunity to see what that person's doing and to ask questions, and it allows for those educational moments, which are really, really cool. I also want to call out, so recently I was in Dublin, and I love the fact that they have those snugs, which is a little bit of a different experience. So obviously snugs are like the kind of closets that are within old pubs, and it allows for more intimate moments. So it does kind of break away from the fact that like it makes for those educational opportunities, but those also make for like individual moments, encourage people to stay longer, and are just really nice. So I just want to call that out as a little bit of history. So looking towards the future, there's a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you all, like as you're thinking about the future of your bar and how you're going to implement some new things, is how do you see hospitality changing in the coming years for you, like in particular? How do you think that you can, focus on making changes to your bar while kind of staying true to the persona that you have, but making for those memorable moments? And in what ways can AI make your job a little bit easier? I really love when you were talking about Death & Co., kind of having that AI library of like all the recipes that you have. That makes your job to be able to connect with people so much easier because you have something that's kind of doing like a lot of the prep work for you, but it's not taking away from that individual attention. And then what are some of the foundational aspects of hospitality that you really want to perfect within your bar? I think these are questions that people should be asking themselves all the time because at the end of the day, hospitality is so incredibly important. It's not changing. Like I said, there's a reason that Cheers was so big, and it's because people identified with it and people wanted to have those moments. So ultimately, my takeaway for all of you is that as you're looking at the future, how can you focus on hospitality and making these welcome and warming environments as things are kind of rapidly changing? Because at the end of the day, AI and technology can't do what you all do. You are all incredibly important and make for welcoming experiences for everybody. So thank you. I wanted to open up the floor to any questions. I'll also say if you do have any questions after this, if they pop up, feel free to send me a DM on Instagram. It's @TravelingNewYorker. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, shock the world. Okay, so in some magic world, if I were to give you $1 million to invest in emerging technologies facing hospitality, what are you doing with that money? And what through line do you see, to 9,000 years ago when place-based bars and hospitality first started, with that emerging technology that you're investing in? Mm-hmm. And what do you think that newly exposes to us about hospitality? There's different pieces, you can just grab whichever.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I honestly, I've never thought if somebody gave me $1 million, what I would do with that. I think ultimately what I would, and maybe this is not answering your question, but you gave me $1 million, I'm going to do whatever I want with it. I think I would really, let me go back to this. When you think of bars that you've all been to and the memorable experiences that you have, what are the ones that stand out? For me personally, it's the ones where I got a really unique perspective of what that bar was. I learned something and I felt kind of special. And I think everybody wants to feel a little bit special. So for me, I would love to invest in a bar that focuses on just hospitality, that is small seating, really strong personality, really, really great drinks, and almost something that's a little bit more old school. And then I would probably invest in technologies that would make my day-to-day a little bit easier in terms of like record keeping and all that stuff, so I could focus on those individual interactions. And then what was your second question?
Well, I'm wondering, I think in that you kind of answered it. I'm wondering what, like, you're looking 10 years from now with this investment, right, this magical money. As we're looking forward, I think each time we apply some new technology to better do the things that we want to do, that exposes something at the core of what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So in looking 10 years from now, what does that tell us about just what's timeless about what we're doing? And I think you kind of hit on that, right? There's like an accessibility thing there. There's what you want from a hospitality experience. But
Yeah, and I think that, I'm kind of going to answer this from the journalism side of things, just because I'm very comfortable with it. But being on the digital media side of things, like when I started my career, it was very print focused, and then it was very digital focused, and then it was very video focused, and then it was very social focused. And ultimately, like that through line is things always change. Like there's always something new, there's always new technology, there's always something coming out. And I think that's the same for bars and restaurants and pretty much anything. But just thinking on like, what is the core value of what we do and why we do it, and why has the hospitality industry been so successful for so long? And that to me is like, that's what needs to be perfected. How do we continue that? Because the technologies and the other things, those will always change. So like, how do you kind of incorporate those when it's supportive to your business, but then also like, don't lose sight of what you're doing and why you're doing it, because that stands out more than anything. And that is, to me, what would draw me back to a bar.
Any other questions? Fantastic.
Well, thank you so
very
much.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you all for being here with us today. Just wanted to provide just a couple minutes recapping a bit about futures. Claire, you threw me under the bus yesterday, so today I will throw you under the bus. What's your most prophetic reflection on the last couple of hours?
You want it to be profound, right? Gosh, just so much from today. But I think it's overwhelmingly been quite optimistic. All of the messages that we've heard have been, how can we change for the better? And that change is constant. And that actually the changes that we need to make are the ones that still continue to bring us closer to the human experience of hospitality, which is I'm excited about. Even when you were talking about future of technology, which we often think is going to get in the way of those interactions, you're talking about that Venn diagram of like the customer experience and the bartender experience, and that little bit in between, which is like the sweet spot, which technology can unlock for both. So I think, all of that for me has been super exciting, because ultimately what we want to protect over the next 10 years is the opportunities for us to get together in real life and have great experiences. And to Sean's point, change is constant, but ultimately it's about creating the conditions for connection, which I'm excited for.
It's truly incredible. The last 2 days, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, and then we'll wrap things up. But just want to share like a feeling of optimism that threaded through all of these 8 talks. And for anyone who is here for all of them, or a few of them, or even just one of them, that's really satisfying right now in light of a lot of things, but also very encouraging. And I think what the key message that I've heard from a lot of our speakers, and totally not because we prompted them to think this way, perhaps, but that there are changes that can be made, there are decisions that can be made as a community and as individuals, but it really does come down to us as individuals, and that real systemic change and real industry change actually germinates really on us, with us as people, right? And when we decide to make something change, just decide to make a change and do something different and push the envelope, that will then build energy and build momentum. And that's where real change comes from. It was one of our slides at the beginning of this whole slate, and yesterday about, invention is less than implementation. And I recently read Ezra Klein's latest book called Abundance, which I highly recommend if anyone's interested in, an actual practical framework for solving the world's big fucking problems. And what it came down to was just a nice example of like, okay, Edison is revered as the person who invented the light bulb, but the genius myth is a myth, right? Edison didn't create the light bulb. There was a lot of technology that came before it and people experimenting and figuring out what filaments were and vacuum tubes and all these things, but he was able to bring it to life, commercialize it, and bring it to the world. And that is the same for all of us. And so it's really important that we as a community continue to remember that we're all a part of this change and making a better 2035 in the future. So thank you all for coming here. Please, all feedback on futures. We're around, so come holler. Thank you all.
Thanks so much, guys.